The true brilliance of Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection is its simplicity. There's nothing complicated in the way that many of the other basic pillars of modern scientific understanding are difficult for the non-scientist, like gravity or particle physics, both of which require a lot of math. In order to understand living systems, natural selection is the most basic of all pieces of fundamental knowledge because it explains the way in which organisms adapt to the demands of their habitats over a period of generations. As I said, the basic mechanism of natural selection is very simple. Only three things are required. Call them necessary conditions in order for natural selection to operate. These three things are: 1. Variation. The population cannot be all the same. They must vary in some phenotypic trait so that some phenotypes can be favored with higher reproductive success. Obviously, this can't happen if every individual were identical. 2. Selection. There must be an association between certain phenotypes and higher fitness, here meaning success in survival and reproduction. You can have variation in your population and no selection. If everybody in the varying population has exactly the same fitness, then, and again, I think this is obvious, there's no systematic favoring of one phenotype over others, and so natural selection will not be causing any evolutionary change in the next generation. 3. Inheritance. There must be an association between the phenotype of parents and the phenotype of offspring. This is basically a fancy way of saying that offspring must resemble parents. We may take this for granted and say, of course, the offspring are inheriting their genes from their parents, but the reality is that there's more than just genes that determine phenotype. Maybe you've heard of nature versus nurture. The crux of that issue is that part of who we are as individuals is genetically determined, nature, while other parts are the result of some aspect of our upbringing, nurture. Everything from the conditions in the womb, how many cigarettes mom smoked when she was pregnant, to the teachers and role models that you've had over the course of your life. Only the nature part is inherited. If a phenotypic trait is primarily or entirely determined by nurture rather than nature, then the offspring won't necessarily resemble the parent, and so the next generation won't be any different from this generation, and so evolutionary change won't be happening. Variation, selection, and inheritance. 3 necessary conditions for evolution by natural selection. I'm going to add now that if you have all 3 of these conditions, if you meet these 3 requirements, then it is a fact that the next generation will be different from this generation, being a little bit more similar in phenotype to the successful parents of this generation. This is evolutionary change at a micro scale. We even refer to this as microevolution. From one generation to the next, the amount of evolutionary change will be minuscule, something that might not even register in your awareness. But if similar minuscule microevolutionary changes were to occur generation after generation for thousands of years, the population of descendants could look noticeably different than the population of its ancestors. And over tens of thousands of years, they might even become dramatically different. Life has been on the planet Earth for at least 3.5 billion years. That's time for an awful lot of change to transpire. Evolutionary biologists like myself are concerned with the history of change and the mechanisms of change, because there's more to the story than just what Darwin brought to the table. If you want to follow up on this, take the biology majors class, BIO110. For now, we're going to run a simulation exercise in which students take the role of a population of predators that exploit a population of a prey species, and this might be toothpicks, beans, or beads, depending on what class you're in. For the predator population, again, that's you all, The first necessary condition of variation will be in the kind of mouthpart you have. Please don't put any of the implements we give you in your mouths. They're just surrogates for what would be mouthparts in a real predator like a bird or something. You will be operating your implement with your hand. Okay, you wouldn't think I need to tell people this, but there have been... Never mind. Initially, the population of predators will consist of about an equal frequency in each of a few different types of mouthparts. You'll be assigned to one of the mouthpart groups randomly with each generation of the simulation. After you have your mouthpart in your hand, you'll go out into nature and live a full life of exactly 60 seconds, collecting as many prey items as you can. After your minute of glory, we'll sit down and assess how successful we were in amassing resources needed for our reproduction. The offspring each of us leaves will be proportional in number to the amount of food we collect. This can mean that the next generation of predators may not have equal amounts of the different kinds of mouthparts. We'll run a calculation of what the new frequencies of the mouthparts are for the next generation, and I'll assign students to be predators again with the numbers of each mouthpart type corresponding to the new frequencies. This continues for 5 generations. Okay, I said that the necessary condition of variation was met by the existence of different kinds of mouthparts in our population of predators. Will there continue to be variation in our population for the entire 5 generations? Well, yes, unless one of the mouthpart types completely outdoes the others, such that by the end of 5 generations it's the only kind that's left. There will continue to be different types of mouthparts in our population, and thus variation will be there. In the simulation, is the second necessary condition of selection being met? How? Hit pause and think about this for a minute before moving on with the playback. Okay, I hope you decided that selection here would be met if the different mouthpart types had different rates of success in collecting prey. Darwin's observation of finches on the Galapagos Islands were that the finches' beaks varied in ways that would make individuals better suited to one type of food over another. If a finch population found itself in a place where only large, hard seeds were available, then a thicker, more massive beak was better because it could break the hard shells of the seeds. In a different location where only small seeds were available, smaller beaks did better because they were more maneuverable and also because they were less costly to produce compared with the larger beaks, which require more material investment. Why did the finch decide for the smaller beak? Because it couldn't afford to pay a large bill. The fact that one beak type does better than a different beak type is exactly the selection needed as condition number 2 for evolution by natural selection. Here's a related question, a serious one this time, about our lab activity this week. Now we might anticipate that as successful mouthparts do better, they might become more common over the 5 generations, and thus our first condition variation is actually changing over the course of our 5 simulated generations. Is selection also changing over the 5 generations of our simulation? I'll leave this as something to talk about during our lab activity. The third necessary condition for evolution by natural selection is inheritance. How is inheritance incorporated into our simulation activity? Again, hit pause and think about this for a bit. Okay, the fact that we use the success of the different mouthpart types in the calculation to determine the relative frequencies in the next generation means that individuals with a successful kind of mouthpart are more likely to be represented in the next generation than individuals with lousier mouthparts. This is like saying, I have this really good mouthpart, I collected tons of food, and so I had a lot of offspring. And so there are more mouthpart types like mine in the next generation. Because if mouth parts were not heritable, then even if I were successful and had a lot of babies, those babies wouldn't look like me. And that would be the absence of inheritance, condition number 3. But since our calculation makes the offspring more closely resemble the successful parents of the previous generation, this is the way inheritance is incorporated into our activity. With all 3 of the necessary conditions met by our activity, the expectation is that evolutionary change will occur each generation, and these smaller changes will add up over 5 generations into something larger. Moreover, this change will be for the better. The population we have at the end will be better adapted for consuming the available prey. In our simulation, the prey items will also be evolving. I'm not addressing this dimension of the simulation here, but you should start thinking about the 3 conditions needed for evolution by natural selection to occur as it pertains to the evolution of the prey species. Is there variation? In what way is the variation manifest for the prey species? Is there selection? What is the cause for the differential success in survival and reproduction? Is there inheritance? Because if you can establish that all 3 of these things are met, then you should be expecting that evolution by natural selection will occur in the prey as well.